Well, it is 3 o'clock. Welcome to Replenish, the atmosphere of discovery, where we discover the master's plan for our lives. So today's session, we will be talking about breaking generational failure. Breaking generational failure. Now, failure is a lack of success, right? It could be a lack of success in any area. So hopefully everyone has been writing, declaring, and fulfilling the visions as we learned on the last session about visionaries. If not, today's title, Breaking Generational Failure, that may be the reason why you haven't been able to write the vision, see the vision, declare the vision, or do the vision. Okay. If your parents, your grandparents never fulfilled a vision, you may need to be the one to break that generational failure. Okay. Most things that you see repeated from grandparent to parent to child, whether it's positive or negative, is a generational cycle. If you see something being repeated from grandparent to parent to child, it is a generational cycle. So, of course, the negative patterns, they need to be broken. They're not going to just go away on their own, right? The negative patterns need to be broken. Someone in the family must disagree with it and then do the opposite of its characteristics, right? In order to break that generational failure. And often we'll disagree with something. We'll say, oh, I know this isn't right. You know, this continued thing that keeps happening in my family, but we won't change our mind about it, right? We won't change how we act or how we think, right? But we'll recognize that the pattern is negative, but we won't act on it, right? So the first thing to do is to recognize that you do have negative patterns in your life. There are some negative patterns that have passed from generation to generation. So the first step is to recognize that, okay? And then you decide to stop agreeing with it, okay? You cannot be forced into disagreeing with it, right? You have to decide yourself to disagree with it, okay? Because if you are forced to disagree with something, you're going to go back. And that's what happens where you have habitual offenders and things like that, because they were forced to say that what I'm doing is wrong, or forced to say that I don't like something that they really do enjoy. Okay, so you must decide to stop agreeing with these negative patterns in your life. Okay, and then you begin thinking, feeling, and being the opposite of that pattern. So once you decide to disagree with the pattern, well, first recognize that there is a negative pattern and then disagree with that negative pattern. Then you have to begin thinking, feeling, and being the opposite of that pattern. And this is a daily choice, right? That means you wake up every day choosing to break this cycle, to break this pattern of generational failure. Okay. And so we're going to discuss some things today that are the consequences to these cycles and contribute to these patterns remaining generation after generation, right? So the first thing we're going to discuss is mental, physical, and emotional abuse. Mental, physical, and emotional abuse. These are consequences of the cycle of brokenness that contribute to continued failure. Mental, physical, and emotional abuse are consequences to that cycle of brokenness, to that cycle of failure, right? That also contribute to continued failure, okay? Any form of abuse is an injury to your spirit. Doesn't matter which one it is. The most recognizable is physical damage, right? But any form of abuse is an injury to your spirit. And anything done to your spirit breaks or binds you to something that you can't see, that can continue to operate long past your physical existence here on the earth. Okay. The birth of a child breaks the barrier between spirit, soul, and body, right? As it exits the womb. So what is carried in the spirit is able to flow through to the next generation, right? If you don't believe me, explain to me how the characteristics of a mother who may have died in childbirth it still exists in her child, right? There's things that happen in the spirit that can being passed on generation after generation if it is not broken. Okay. And we're not talking about breaking the positive cycles, right? We're talking about the negative patterns that we have that keeps us in generational failure. Okay. So it also happens by the same words being repeated to a child, right? As they grow up, the same you can't, you want, you don't, that was spoken by the generation prior. These words the children grow up to believe, right? Because faith comes by hearing. Okay. Every mental, physical, and emotional wound is fertile ground for seeds of failure and lack. Every mental, physical, and emotional wound is fertile ground for seeds of failure and lack, right? That's why you cannot afford to stay mentally and emotionally wounded for so long, right? The same way how a physical wound needs to heal quickly because it's a perfect place for an infection to dwell in. So that's the same way an emotional or mental wound should heal quickly because an infection, something can invade that wound, right? And cause death, right? So you must be willing to receive healing before expecting to break that generational failure. Okay, otherwise you will begin to bleed on people in order to gain success. You won't do it with integrity. You'll do it by hurting other people. And being successful at the cost of hurting others, it produces failure still, right? So you're not truly winning or breaking that cycle of failure. Okay, abuse is a repeated cycle and consequence of failure, even when it's not done between people. You may not mistreat other people, but you mistreat yourself. Okay, you devalue your things, you devalue your gifts, your talents, right? Your friendships, your relationships. You devalue your time. Okay, this contributes to the cycle of failure. So you have to start saying no to remaining broken and wounded, right? Stop. So you have to start saying no to devaluing yourself. Okay, you have to start saying no to wasting your time or taking advantage, not taking advantage of your gifts and your talents, right? Not taking advantage of the beneficial relationships that you have. Okay, and after you start saying no, start doing the opposite. Okay. Start healing and mending. Start valuing yourself. Start using your gifts. Okay. Be productive with your time. Start enjoying your relationships and nurturing your relationships. Okay. So, like I said, you don't want to just disagree. You have to start changing your mindset. You have to do something about what you're saying that you are disagreeing with. Okay. The next thing is injustice. Injustice, which is a lack of fairness, right? It is a consequence and a contributor to failure. Okay. There was something done towards you that you saw, you heard, or you felt that was not fair to you, or that you perceived was not fair to you, right? An injustice to your body, an injustice to your mind, your spirit. It can cause real damage to your self-esteem, to your moral compass. It can cause damage to your faith and your belief systems, right? Your perceptions and your thinking processes. So when you have been crushed and broken, weakened, offended, or abused by the words and actions of others, you can develop self-sabotaging behaviors because you want to avoid those feelings of injustice, right? You want to avoid those injuries, okay? But when you process those feelings, okay, when you acknowledge those injuries and you overcome their power over you, you're more likely to no longer operate from a place of fear or from a place of failure. Say no to becoming the injustice you have faced. Okay? Begin to do the opposite. Begin to speak the opposite. Begin to do the opposite of what was done to you. Okay? That's how you stop that cycle. If you are being lied on, tell the truth. and stop repeating the lie. A lot of times we want to say what other people said about us, right? Don't add the lie into your conversations. Just speak the truth, right? Let the truth speak for you. If you are being mishandled, will you handle people the right way? Okay, don't handle them the same way that they handle you. Okay, we don't like that part, right? But when you handle someone the same way they're handling you and they're mishandling you, it still leaves you in the cycle of failure right along with them, right? So even when you speak the truth, when you muddle it with their lies, right? You're still giving the lie life, okay? And we're trying to break that cycle of failure, okay? The next one, financial, spiritual, and intellectual barriers are blockages that contribute to failure. And I'm naming these things because you will see these things showing up from grandparent to parent to child. This is how you know that this is a generational failure, okay? Financial, spiritual, and intellectual barriers are blockages that contribute to failure. Okay, lacking the ability and willingness to acquire and apply knowledge and skills are consequences to the cycle of failure. Okay, and this affects you financially, spiritually, and intellectually. Okay, you need to gain access to knowledge to get past these barriers, which is why those stuck in this cycle of failure tend to run away from learning, right? You think, oh, I just hate learning, right? Okay, you're stuck in a cycle of failure because once you gain knowledge, you can apply the knowledge and get out of that cycle, right? These types of people, they don't like asking questions and would rather remain in the dark than to expose their lack of knowledge, right? So you have to start saying no to those financial limitations, right? And do the opposite of what you've been doing. Start managing your money, right? Get a higher position with more pay. Take a finance class, right? Say no to spiritual immaturity. Start studying the word of God, okay? Before you finish your prayer time, stay a few minutes longer to see if God wants to speak something to you, right? Also, listen to people who are grounded in spiritual matters, right? Say no to willful ignorance. Start gathering information. Do research on what you don't know. Ask questions about what you don't understand, okay? Because those blockages contribute to your failure. You can't do what you don't know, okay? And so, in order to do something different, you have to gain some more information. The next one, pride. Pride is a consequence of the cycle of failure that contributes to continued failure, right? Pride is another one of the reasons why we don't ask questions, okay? Pride will always produce failure, and failure produces shame when it stems from pride, okay? When you fail, and you are emotionally healthy, it drives you, right? It gives you another direction to look in. Failure in a healthy with a healthy mind will give you new ideas, right? But when you're not healthy, you fail, right? And you just fail and that's it. You don't learn anything from it. You just continue to fail. And when I say pride, I'm not talking about the pride that you have as a child of God because you have confidence in who God created you to be. I'm talking about the arrogant pride where you have to exalt yourself above other people in a harmful, demeaning way, right? The pride that fails is the pride that tries to be more than you actually are or have been given the grace to have, right? That presumptuous pride always fails. So say no to putting people down in order for you to be lifted higher. If you want to break that form of generational failure, say no to putting people beneath you in order for you to be raised higher. Allow God to glorify you, allow God to lift you up, right? Be confident in who God has built you up to be, but not more than that, okay? Where you have to step on others, okay? The next one I want to talk about is procrastination. Procrastination is a consequence of the cycle of failure that contributes to continue failure because you continue to be late for the appointed time set up for the vision that you were given, right? And procrastination is delay, right? Is due to fears from probably, collected pieces of unhealed soul wounds. Okay, traumatic experiences can take that confidence you need to start to live a purposeful life. Okay, so guarding your confidence prevents procrastination. All procrastination is not just simple laziness. Okay, sometimes it's stuff hidden that you need to discover and you need to address. Procrastination also comes from being a perfectionist. You're not going to move until every single detail is perfect. All of these things can cause you to procrastinate, and all of them is filtered through your level of confidence. So whether your confidence was broken due to traumas or something maybe even self-inflicted, it must be strengthened through the action of healing and renewing. Okay, so in order to break that generational failure, you have to say no to wasting more time, right? Say no to delay. Okay, do the thing that you're afraid to do, right? Start showing up on time. Stop pushing the snooze button, right? Show up in the little things. And you can kill that procrastination by just set a time for dinner and stick with it, right? That helps you overcome procrastination, okay? The next thing I want to discuss is disobedience, rebellion, and stubbornness. These are consequences of the cycle of failure. If any of these things I'm naming, if you're seeing this generationally, it is generational failure. You're seeing it from grandparent to parent to child. It is generational failure, okay? These contribute to continued failure because you refuse to submit and you refuse to obey, okay? You see this showing up when people tell you what to do or they tell you how to do something, right? You can't listen to people, okay, that are over you, that have leadership or authority over you. And that includes parents, that includes law enforcement, that includes your boss on your job, right? You can't listen to people. And if you can't listen to people that you can touch, you surely are not listening to God who you cannot touch, right? If you can't submit to leaders God placed over you, you surely will not submit to God. And there's some area in your life that you are not submitting to God. So if you show me somebody that is disobedient and disrespects authority, I will show you the same person that is doing the same thing to God. You may not see it, but they are. Okay, you will fail when you cannot follow instructions the way they were given to you, not adjusting it because you think you know best. Okay, how many times do you have to fail before you do the exact instruction that was given to you, right? When it was given to you. It's a reason why you can't do it your own way, okay? Your way sucks, okay? Your way doesn't have the end in mind. Your way is filled with unhealed versions of yourself, unhealed perspectives, okay? Say no to your own way and obey the leaders and the guides that God has sent your way, that God put them in place, right, to help you, because God knew for you to walk this way, you were going to need someone else to guide you, that this was one of the ways. And it's not always in every area, but God knew that this was one of the ways that you would try to be led by your own understanding and you would fail. So he put these people in your path to help guide you for this thing. It may not be for every single thing, but for this particular thing, I'm going to send you someone that can guide you on this path, right? So you have to start saying no to your own way. Obey the leaders put in place for you. Stop doing the opposite of what they say. They say go left, you go right, right? Do it the right way the first time. So if you notice any of these cycles in your life, in your character, in your thought process, in your feelings, and you know that your children and your parents and grandparents have these same issues, you need to break this generational failure. And so we must be willing to give up trying to not look like a failure when we're failing, right? We do a good job of looking healthy, but not actually being healthy, right? We do a good job of looking wealthy because of the brands we might wear, because of the house we're renting, or the people we associate with, but don't actually have any wealth, right? And the only thing we actually own are the clothes that have the name brands on it, right? We don't actually own the land or the house or the things that we are portraying that we own, right? Even the friends that we associate with, we can't really call them when we're in a crisis because these are just our friends for how it looks, right? It's all for show. A cycle of promotion, elevation, and success is proof that the generational failure is broken. When you enter a cycle of promotion, elevation, and success, that is the proof that the generational failure is broken. Not just the appearances of promotion, elevation, and success because you have a title, right? But it's not being reflected in your finances. It's not being reflected in your spirit. It's not being reflected in your children, in your legacy. It's not being reflected in your wholeness and your soundness, right? Throughout your life, there are breakers, right? Which are people that God put in place that present themselves to see if you will agree to disconnect, to disagree, and detach from those negative patterns, right? And we often don't recognize them the first couple of times they show up. And we allow a poverty mindset to cause us to abort our destinies, cause us to cancel the vision, cause us not to show up at the appointed time, right? And this mindset does not just affect your finances, okay? It affects your mental capacity, your emotional awareness. It affects your physical health, right? You will not see success as success when you're in this cycle of failure. When other people are successful around you, you minimize it, right? When you increase in an area, you won't recognize it, you ignore it, right? You play it down because until you break that cycle and heal, you will always feel like you're losing, even when you are being promoted and elevated, right? You'll still feel that you are losing and you will sabotage it so that it continues to follow your children and their children. But you can say no. You can disagree with it. Say no and then do the opposite. Okay. If every time you start to see the light and you call that same person and you end up back in the dark, stop calling that person. Right? You can't see the negative pattern and disagree with it, but don't do anything about it. You have to disagree, you have to say no, and then you have to do the opposite. Okay. So if failure has been the cycle, you cut that cycle when you say no. So if failure is a cycle that your family has been in, when you say no, you cut it, right? But then you have to change the characteristics, change the mindsets, and do the opposite thing. And when you do that, it's not just it's broken. You now have a chance to form a whole nother cycle that is healthy and that is whole for generations to come, right? And so you need to be in a cycle. The generation needs to be in a cycle and remain in a cycle, and one that is fruitful and one that is producing, right? And so all of the things I listed, abuse, right? Mental, emotional, and physical, injustices, barriers, financial barriers, spiritual barriers, intellectual barriers, pride, procrastination, disobedience, rebellion, stubbornness. All of these things are in the cycle of generational failure. If you notice any of these things from grandparent to parent to child, you need to break this cycle of failure. You recognize, number one, where those negative patterns are. Recognize that there are negative patterns, right? Everything in your family that has been passed down is great. Not everything is great. There's some things that are negative that is stopping you from having success in one particular area of your life. So you recognize where those patterns are. You disagree with it. Stop saying, oh, my grandparent didn't do it. My parents didn't do it. I'm not doing it. My children aren't doing it. Stop saying that. Disagree with it, right? Because as the world gets older, it gets harder because we're introduced to a whole lot more things now than it was a decade ago, right? And it's happening quicker. And so it's going to be harder for your grandchildren or your great grandchildren to try to break this cycle, right? Because they're going to be just flooded with so many other options to keep it going. And so you want to disagree with it and then do the opposite. So that means you have to change your mindset. You can't think the same way, and you have to wake up every day with the mindset that I'm breaking this cycle. Okay. I'm saying no. It's not something that's going to just pull away from you willingly, right? Because it's a cycle. So you have to say no, break it, and then create a new cycle that is beneficial, that is productive, right? For you and your generations to come. And so that concludes our session for today. I hope whatever pattern that you notice that is negative, that is generational, that you will choose to be the cycle breaker on today. That when you go to bed tonight and when you wake up in the morning, you're not going to be okay with the same thoughts. You're not going to be okay with behaving the same way, getting up and doing the same thing the way you did it before that caused you to fail. Okay. Sometimes that includes removing people, that includes not speaking to certain people, right? Because they help keep the cycle going, right? And so you want to recognize those negative patterns, say no, and then do the opposite, okay? You don't want to look healed, you want to be healed. You don't want to look successful, you want to actually be successful, right? And so if you have been doing that, if you have been uh, acting a certain way that you're not, well, today you can choose to actually be successful. You can choose to be victorious, right? By getting out of those cycles. Okay. So I hope something was said that brought your attention to something that maybe you hadn't taken a moment to look at in your life, right? But if it's something that grandparent is doing, parent is doing, you're doing, and now you're seeing it in your children and it's negative, stop praising it. Sometimes we praise and reward negative characteristics, right? And it's just going to continue and get worse and get harder to break, right? So choose to break the generational failure in your life. There's a lot of things that we tell ourselves and we cause ourselves to not grow, right? And it may be something we repeated that someone else said, but it's not true, right? And it's kept them in that cycle of failure, and now it's keeping you. And then before you know it, you don't catch yourself. You're repeating those same words to your children. And if you're in a position of leadership, especially if you're like a teacher or a boss, maybe you're an employer, you'll repeat those things to people, and then they repeat them to their children, or you know what I mean? And it continues to be a cycle that is reinforced by negative words, by negative actions. And so when you meet people that are in that cycle of failure, which simply means lack of success. So you may be successful, let's say you're successful in your career, but maybe in your emotional relationships, you're not successful, right? Or there's a reason for that. You know, it's not just happening. It could be other people, but if this happens with every single person you meet, it's probably you, right? It's probably a characteristic you have that you are repeating that causes these things, or even causes these certain types of people to be attracted to you. And so if you're experiencing failure over and over and over again, and your parents have experienced the same failure and your children are experiencing the same failure, then somebody needs to decide to break it. And you can't just say, I disagree with it, right? We see injustices all the time and we see these things that happen all the time and we just disagree, but we don't change our mindset. We don't actually do anything. And until you change your mindset, that's when you'll see the change. Okay. Not just saying, I don't agree with that. That doesn't change anything. Changing the way you think is what changes. And so the same way when you go into neighborhoods that are maybe poverty stricken or drug infested, well, you can put the best schools there. You can have the most educated mayor, the best president, all of these things. But if those people don't change their mind, that neighborhood will never change. Right? You have to change your mind. If you are a visionary, which is the last session we had, um, this is something that is vital to you. When you're speaking with people, you have to get their minds to change if they are part of your vision, right? People try to be a part of other people's vision without changing their mind, right? And so if you have the same mindset, a lot of times that's not conducive to your vision manifesting, they will cause your vision to fail, right? So you have to make sure the people that you're talking to about what it is you want to do, you have to make sure that they have the same mindset. But I want to thank you all for continuing to support and continuing to listen and hopefully continuing to change and be God's version of yourself. Hopefully you have, through these sessions, I think this is the 53rd one. Hopefully through these sessions, you have discovered who you are, who God has created you to be, and you're on the way to living out your purpose and the plan that He has for your life, and no longer living the old way that was not beneficial, that wasn't producing anything, right? So I will see you all next Friday at 3. Y'all be blessed.